cities, towns, and villages have already done their canvass and have certified the election at the local level. Our county election officials are now conducting their canvass and their certification process. 55 of our 72 counties have already certified the results as of this morning. And what is canvass? So canvass is where our local election officials double check the results. They're looking to see that they have the same number of ballots issued as voter signatures in the poll book and absentee requests. This is also a check to make sure that everyone was registered to vote. You can only be issued a ballot if you're registered to vote and you appear on the poll book. The canvass process is also publicly observable, and it's where we are looking for any errors that might have been made during the election process before those results become official. So the unofficial election night results are posted based on those unofficial tallies. And so as you all know, the 72 counties are required to post those unofficial results from all the municipalities on their website after election night, after that unofficial tally happens. And so this is now, again, the process where they are taking those unofficial results and they're becoming certified official results. The canvass statements are also posted publicly, so you can see any changes or any issues that are discovered during the canvass process. There have not been any large issues reported to us during the canvass process, and if there are, those issues are reported to us and to the public by the local election officials, as well as by any observers that are part of the canvass process, which usually also includes representatives from the political parties. So the final step of the certification process, after the counties have finished their certification, will be the state canvassing those unofficial results and certifying the results. And that's scheduled for December 1st, pending any changes to the timeline with a potential recount. The next thing that we're doing is we're preparing for the potential of a recount. So recounts are conducted by county clerks. And so the law says that any aggrieved party, and that's defined as the top two vote getters in a contest that are with 1% of the margin of victory, that second most vote getter is eligible to file for a recount. If the margin is between 0.26% and 1%, then that aggrieved candidate has to pay the costs of the recount in advance. If it's 0.25% or less, then the state would absorb that cost for that recount. And so in terms of preparations, what are we doing? We're working with our county clerks because the 72 county clerks are the ones that are statutorily charged with conducting recounts. And so we've been having regular calls and meetings with them to make sure that we're all preparing for that possibility. Oftentimes, our 72 county clerks, if they have a recount, they're going to bring in local election officials, poll workers, chief inspectors from their municipalities to help staff and conduct the actual recount. And so that's sort of the logistics of it, figuring out that space and where it's actually going to happen, who's going to staff the recount, and making sure we're all prepared for that. The timeline for a recount is not necessarily a fixed timeline, and it is dependent on a few factors. The first is when the last county canvass is filed. So like I talked about, there are 72 counties, 55 of them have certified their canvass. And so when the last canvass is filed out of the 72, that really starts the recount timeline clock. The deadline for our counties to submit their canvass is the 17th of November. So that's next week. And we anticipate that the counties will be canvassing up until that point. So we anticipate that we will get that last canvass statement from our counties either on the 16th, but most likely on the 17th is when we will get that on the deadline. So once that last canvass is filed, then the party that wishes to request a recount has until 5 p.m. on the following business day. So let's say we get the last certified canvas statement from our counties on the deadline of the 17th. That would mean, under that hypothetical timeline, that would mean that the party would have until 5 p.m. on the following business day, which would be 5 p.m. on the 18th, to file a recount petition, and also to file the actual estimated costs of the recount as is estimated by our county clerks. So the law says that the aggrieved party that's filing a recount also has to pay the costs up front. And so the counties have to estimate what their costs would be. And the WEC is also able to estimate what our costs would be in terms of staffing a recount as well. And so by 5 o'clock on that next business day, they have to file the petition paperwork, and they also have to file the estimated cost as well. And so right now we're working with our counties to also collect that cost information from the counties. We do have a good baseline, right? We can look back at 2016 and see what the costs were in 2016 to conduct the recount. But I think it's important to note as we look at that a lot has changed, that especially given COVID, the need for larger spaces to make sure that we can accommodate both the staff of the recount as well as observers safely is a major factor in this. A lot of people aren't able to use perhaps their county buildings and need to use a larger space to conduct a recount. And so right now, all of our 72 counties are going through that exercise of looking at 2016, but also looking at what are the new needs for 2020, be it space, be it PPE, be it even things like holiday pay, because how this recount timeline works, the recount would actually be conducted over Thanksgiving and over the holiday, and they do only have 13 days to complete that. So there's a lot of factors they're looking at right now to take those 2016 estimates and see what else they need to add to those costs to make sure that we have an accurate estimate. And we expect to have that final estimate from the counties by Monday. No later than Monday. So if the petition and the payment is received by the deadline, so if somebody does request a recount, if they're eligible, they're within that 1%, and they submit the petition and the estimated payment by 5 p.m. on that following business day, then the commission would meet to order a recount, to basically say, we've got everything that we need, the recount can happen and we can order a recount. The commission does have a meeting penciled in for the 19th, because again, that's the most likely timeline if we get the last canvas on the 17th. So they have a meeting penciled in for the 19th. At that time, the commission, when they order the recount, can choose to issue that order within a reasonable amount of time. So either they could issue it right away on the 19th, or looking at the calendar, they may choose to issue it on the 20th or the 21st, because again, it's a sort of a cascading set of deadlines that happens that they would be able to choose when they issue that order within a reasonable amount of time. From the time that the commission issues the order, that is when a 13-day time clock starts for the recount to be conducted and to be finished. And also from the time that that order is issued, it also means that the counties have until 9 a.m. on the third day, not business day, but third day after that order to organize and convene no later than 9 a.m. on that third day. So if there was an order issued on the 19th, that would mean that the counties had to convene no later than 9 a.m. on Sunday, which is the third day after that, which is the 22nd. And so, there are some timing considerations there as well. What is the recount? So recount, but what is a recount? And I think a recount in a lot of ways is like a canvas. It's really a double check on the process. It's where you're making sure that you have the correct number of registrations, the correct number of signatures in the poll book, the correct number of ballots that have been issued. It's also where you make sure that the equipment has counted everything correctly. Jurisdictions do have the discretion to conduct either a hand recount or to use voting equipment to conduct that recount and to retabulate those votes as well. The party that's requesting a recount can also choose where they'd like to request that recount. So it either can be statewide, it can be in specific counties, specific municipalities, or specific jurisdictions as well. And just like election day, a recount, it's in so many ways like, election day, the counting of ballots and the canvass, whereas it's publicly available. So anybody that was able to observe on election day was able to observe the counting of absentee ballots at central count or at your polling place, or that was able to observe the canvass is also able to observe a recount as well. And so often you'll see, again, those political parties and others that will observe a recount in the recount process. And so we'll continue to work with our counties to prepare for the possibility of a recount. We'll continue to answer any questions about the process and about the timeline. And overall, we're just going to make sure that we're ready and that we're prepared in the event that a recount is requested with our office. So those are really the major updates on where we're at in the process, is finishing the canvass and preparing for the possibility of a recount. We're also continuing to provide information to voters with concerns and really make it a top priority to connect those voters with concerns with facts about the elections process. So thank you to all of you for your role in that and helping us make sure that voters know the facts, the mechanical facts about how elections work to help address some of their concerns. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to all of you to see if you have any questions.
So please raise your hands. I see a lot of people doing that. The first one is somebody named Kessling.
Hi, this is Ben Kessling from the Wall Street Journal. You talked a little bit about some of the estimates for recount. What is, as far as right now, building all these factors in there, what is the latest estimate you have for the cost of a recount? And has there been any indication ahead of time that the Republican campaign has given any indication that they will avail themselves of this and if they're willing to pay for it?
Thank you for the question. So we do not have an estimate at this time because, again, it's coming from each of the 72 counties. So we've been meeting with them to take a look at the 2016 numbers and to make sure that everybody's considering any of the differences for 2020. Again, making sure they have PPE, things like plexiglass barriers. A lot of places need to get a larger space. There's also some challenges with just staffing this and making sure that folks are willing to work over the holiday. Oh, another thing I should have mentioned about the recount timeline is once they start the recount, they can't adjourn for more than a day. And so that means if they choose Thanksgiving Day to be their day to, adjourn, then they'd have to come back and reconvene on that Friday and over that weekend as well. And so, there's certainly some challenges for staffing as well. But we don't have any cost estimates for all of the 72 counties. They're still working to get that information to us. We're having regular calls with them to refine those numbers, to answer questions about the process. But we do have some groundwork laid from 2016 in terms of, time it took, things like that. And some of the estimates I think will be relevant, but I do think there will be some differences in the numbers this time around.
When you say differences in cost.
Right, differences in costs in terms of needing larger spaces. Let's say that a county has to move their recount to an arena or some larger space so that they can spread out and accommodate observers. They're also going to have to think about things like security. If they're in their county building conducting a recount, they have double lock rooms where they're able to secure materials overnight. If they're in a rented space, to make sure that they have enough room, then they may not have those security features built in. And so they may need to consider other things for security. So I do think there's some different considerations, certainly in 2020, that could result in higher costs.
Thank you.
And so just so everybody knows, I think, Meagan, you didn't mention this, in 2016, the cost was just over $2 million. So that gives you sort of a baseline. Next question is from Nick Bohr. Nick, you have to unmute yourself.
Yep, I'm there. Thank you. So just kind of following up on that last question, have you received any kind of complaints or any indication from the Trump campaign or anyone affiliated with that there would be any sort of lawsuit filed over this? Have you received any sort of indication at this point that they are proceeding with any sort of lawsuit or any evidence of voter fraud that you've seen in this election?
No, at this time we have not received any indications or confirmation, but again, the deadline isn't here yet that there will be a recount or intention to file a recount, and there have not been any legal actions filed with our office, nor have we received any evidence to our office about any sort of issues with the conduct of the election.
And just the other thing to remember is that if the campaign is not happy with the outcome of the recount, that is when they can go to court. They can't sue before the recount is complete. So next is Dakota.
I see there was also a question about who's the man behind the curtain, and that's our public information officer, Reed Magny.
Oh. Sorry.
No, that's fine. So thank you for doing this. I was curious with the canvass process and coming up with those official vote counts, what is kind of considered a typical variation on those numbers for a presidential election? And have you noted any unusual difference in count thus far with the counties who have reported in?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't know that there's a usual difference. I think that it's rare to see any sort of significant changes. So, you know, during the canvass, there may be, like, for example, I think there was a jurisdiction that said they had a ballot that came in from a military voter that was in a regular type envelope because they're allowed to get their ballots electronically. So they printed off and put it in a regular envelope, that they had missed that as part of the tally, but it had been received by 8 o'clock. And so they were able to add that during the canvass process to their totals. So I think it's unusual to see anything of significance, I will say, during the canvass process. And no, we have not heard of any significant changes. But again, all those unofficial election night totals are still out there and available. So you can see what were the numbers on election night. And then you also have those certified canvass statements that are also posted on our website. So anybody's able to take a look at those and see any changes. After the certification process, there will also be more data at a more granular level that would also be available to see any changes that happened. But again, it's a publicly observable process. So if somebody did recognize a significant change, I'm sure it would be news very quickly.
Next is Cheyenne Hazlett.
Hi, Megan. Thanks for doing this. So the 13-day timeline, is that including the 3 days to reconvene? Because I think 2016 took 10 days, right? So is it 3 days to reconvene or to convene to begin counting for the counties and then 10 days after that?
That's correct. Yeah, it's a total of 13 days. So that 3 days from the order plus the 10 days gets you to the 13. So from the time that the order is issued, they have 13 days to organize, convene, conduct the recounts, and complete it.
So we're looking at the recount ending midweek, the first week of December?
I think, yes, under sort of the hypothetical scenario where we get the last canvass statement on the 17th and the commission orders the recount either on the 20th or the 21st. Correct. I think we'd be looking at that first week of December.
Okay. And to your knowledge, is there any way that I know there's talk of an investigation into the election from the Republicans in the state legislature. Is there any way that the results of the election could be overturned by the state legislature?
So thanks for that question. And, I think I'm not aware of there being any possibility for that. I think that would require court intervention for anything like that to occur. I don't believe that the legislature has the ability to do something along those lines.
All right, next is Matt Smith.
Megan, a couple quick logistical if a recount were to happen. So you mentioned the dates. Would that December 1st date from WEC then be pushed back, obviously? And is the December 14th day, is that set in stone for the Electoral College to meet? What happens in terms of shifting these dates?
Right. So exactly. December 1st is the deadline for the state to certify the results under normal circumstances if there's not a recount. But you're correct. And we saw this in 2016 as well. The commission does have to certify the state level results before the electoral process proceedings begin. And one of the first deadlines, I believe, is on the 8th of December, which is the safe harbor law or deadline as to do with the presidential electors. So they would still intend to certify the results of the election in that first week of December.
Great. And then real quick, on a potential recount, in terms of the absentee ballots in municipalities with central count, are they able to do all of this in one facility, absentee and regular ballots like Milwaukee, for example?
Yeah, good question. So because a recount is conducted at the county level, all of the materials of the election go to one place. So if someone does central count as well, or versus doing their absentees at the polling place, all of the materials for that election go to one central place to be counted as part of that process. So as they go through a recount, let's say that they're going through a county by each municipality, they're going to go ward by ward, reporting unit by reporting unit as they go through. So they would be doing the in-person ballots at the same time as they're doing those central count ballots for that ward.
Thank you.
Next is Caroline Peterson.
Hi there. Thanks for doing this and taking our questions. I know that you guys sent out a memo regarding the claim that there were some illegal curing of ballots, if you will, and changing ballots and changing addresses. I just wanted to get your guys' response on I know you said that you had not had any evidence come into your office of any significant fraud, but if you could just comment on that and kind of what you guys are and how you respond to that.
Sure. So as we put out in our news release earlier this week, there had been questions about this process and also claims that it was a new process. So in 2016, the commission, with advice by the DOJ at the time, had said that when the law changed, it said that a voter must sign their absentee ballot certificate along with their witness. And I think that's probably one of the most important parts of this conversation is we got a lot of questions about correcting of ballots. This is not correcting of ballots. This is the certification envelope that the ballot goes in. And so a voter is required to sign that certificate. Their witness is required to sign that certificate. And there's also required to be information about that witness's address. Now, if an election official gets the absentee ballot back and sees that the certificate has the signatures on it, but it's missing components or it's missing the address, then the direction was, and again, this is since 2016, the direction was that if that clerk has information on that witness's address before them. So let's say the most common example is something like 2 absentee ballots come back, a husband's and a wife. They've served as one another's witness, but one of them did not put on the witness address, but you have that witness's address right in front of you on their ballots, that they are able to use that information to complete the witness address piece. They can never make changes to the actual ballot itself. They can never add the witness signature or the voter's signature. But if they have that information about what the witness's address is before them, then they have to include that on the certificate. And I would actually say too, the 2016 guidance was that the clerks need to conduct that. It actually wasn't voluntary guidance. And again, it's been part of all the guidance about how to process absentee ballot certificates since 2016, including the 2016 presidential election.
All right, next is Riley Vetterkind.
Hi, thanks for doing this call. So with this Assembly Elections Committee investigation, a couple of the members on that committee have expressed some concerns about people who have voted who are on the ERIC voter list, as well as people who certified that they were indefinitely confined. I just wanted to, I know you've addressed this before, but I just wanted to have you talk about maybe some of the security measures that were in place, just to talk about why people should be confident in the integrity of the election regarding those two things.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, and I certainly look forward to and welcome the opportunity to work with the committee and provide any information we can. I talking about elections and about how elections work and about the procedure, it's what we do. And so I look forward to having that opportunity, because whenever we can provide that information to voters and help them understand the process and give them confidence in the results, I think is just, there's not much more that's more important. So I look forward to that opportunity. In terms of the indefinitely confined procedure, so this is a provision that is included as part of the photo ID law. So when the photo ID law was passed, I think the initial iteration of it was in 2011. There were some changes throughout court proceedings over the years. There were times at which it was enjoined and that photo ID wasn't required. But the law has had a provision that says, if you are indefinitely confined, so the law says that means that you can certify that because of reason of age, illness, infirmity, or disability, that you're unable to vote at the polls on election day, that if you certify to that, and it's a self-certification, it's an attestation of the voter themselves, a determination that they make, that they're able to receive their absentee ballot by mail without providing a photo ID. But it does not exempt them from voter registration. It does not exempt them from signing their absentee ballot certificate and to having a witness on their absentee ballot certificate. Those are still things that are required. So any voter, be it an indefinitely confined voter, a military voter, an overseas voter, or a regular voter, when they're asking for an absentee ballot, they have to first be registered to vote. And there's multiple checks on that process to make sure that only registered voters can receive an absentee ballot. And when you register to vote, you have to provide personally identifiable information like your driver license or your social security card. You also have to provide a proof of residence document, and that proves where you live at the time of registration. In addition to that, you're also sent a postcard to verify that you actually live at that address. And if it's returned, there are follow-up items on that registration as well. And so that's just the registration piece, and that's required for anybody to get on the poll list or to receive an absentee ballot. And then again, from there, once that voter does receive their absentee ballot, if they're indefinitely confined, they still have to sign the certification saying that they're an eligible elector, and their witness still has to sign the certification saying that they witnessed that voter and they know that that voter is the one that cast their ballot for that ballot to be counted. And if any of those elements are missing, that voter would not either receive a ballot or that ballot would not be counted at the polls on election day. And another thing about absentee voting is all that information carries through to the poll book as well. And so if somebody does receive an absentee ballot, that's also indicated on their voter record and carried through to their signature block on the poll book as well. So if a voter did receive and return their absentee ballot, that's going to be on the poll book, and it would prevent them from being able to participate at the polls on election day as well. So that's the certificate process. In terms of the potential movers, and that's certainly a much more complicated question, and one if we had more time, I would be more than happy to dive into the detailed mechanics of that process as well. But I think one of the big things is right now that is a question before our Wisconsin Supreme Court. And so the commission is awaiting a decision and will, of course, follow the direction of the Supreme Court once that decision is issued. But that is currently where that question resides, is with the state of Wisconsin Supreme Court. But how does that process work? So those were voters who were sent a postcard saying that the address you have on file with the DMV is different than the address in your voter record. And not to get too in the weeds, but the state of Wisconsin doesn't have a connection between the voter registration list and the DMV. In a lot of other states, they have things like automatic registration, where if you update your product with the DMV, it carries through your voter registration. Our state does not have that law, so they're completely separate systems. And so if somebody goes into the DMV and says, hey, I store my car, let's say in this other garage over the winter, in some cases, that new address is attributed to their DMV record. And so what the ERIC process does is it really just takes a look at the voter registration list and the DMV's list and flags differences in addresses. Sometimes there are differences, that have to do with where the voter registered a vehicle or vehicle purposes, but not necessarily registration for voting purposes. And so we send them a mailer that says, we have information that says that you have a different address here than you do here. If you have moved, you're going to need to get re-registered at your correct address. Here's how you do it. If you have not moved and you still reside here, you can send back this postcard and let us know that you still reside at that address. And then we take those records. So anybody that was sent one of those postcards where there was a difference, we take those records and we put it into the statewide database. So if you were sent one of those postcards and you looked up your record, let's say on My Vote, or you went into the polls to vote on election day, you're going to see there's a watermark on your record that says, have you moved? And so when you go to vote, you're going to be asked, have you moved? Do you still live at this address? And if you do still live at that address, you're going to be asked to sign affirming that you still live at that address. And if you have moved, then you're going to be prompted to register to vote at your correct address, provide proof of residence. And so that's how that process works. And that's where we're at with that process.
Meagan, with the absentee, if one of these people on the movers list requests an absentee ballot, would they also be prompted to answer whether they've moved or not?
So as part of the request process, they have to provide their information about their address where they're registered. And if there's a difference during that request process, then yes, the clerks are prompted to follow up with that person and make sure that they're registered to vote at the correct address. And so, absentee is such a manual, person-driven process where each of our 1,850 local election officials receives those requests, has to make sure that the voter is lawfully registered, has to make sure they've provided the correct information, and also make sure that they feel that that voter is correctly registered in the right districts, wards, is getting the right ballot. So that's also part of the absentee process as well.
Okay, and then I just have one more about this committee and how it relates to the canvassing process. So this elections committee, they say they want to field any concerns from voters who may have witnessed something suspicious, at polling places across the state. At the same time, as you've talked about, we're going through the canvass process. Is the canvass process, in your view, meant to deal with all the things that this elections committee is looking into as well? Any allegations of fraud, et cetera. Would you look into things that a committee brings up of concern?
Well, we look into any concern that anybody brings to our attention. We're every day answering questions from the legislature, answering questions from the public about processes, about procedures, about things that oftentimes do amount to rumors. But again, to someone with that concern, they want to know how it actually works. And so I always welcome any opportunity to be completely transparent about elections and to educate people about how the process works. Because again, I think oftentimes people, they don't know the mechanics. And I do think it's my job to make sure that people have that information and that they have access to that information as well. So the canvas, you're right, is when they're looking for issues. They're looking to identify issues. And if there are issues, they have to go and figure out why that happened, and they have to fix it. And they have to do that in a public setting, right? And so I think that, that's why we canvass, is to try to find issues and to get those corrected. If there is any kind of problem, if any kind of issue is discovered, that's when it needs to be discovered before those results are certified. And so, anytime something's brought to our attention, we certainly will look into it and make sure that's been considered, make sure that it can be explained, make sure we understand why or if it happened. And we will continue to do that.
All right, next is Savannah Tomei.
Hi, Megan and Reed. Thank you as always. My big question is about poll workers. I know we were worried about having enough for November 3rd, and there were so many people who stepped up so we could get really close to that 30,000 poll worker number. How many poll workers do we need for a recount? I'm guessing it's fewer just because there's a lot more time on their side to be able to get through it. But should we be concerned about having enough when it's a little later notice and now possibly having to recount through a holiday?
Yeah, so you're right. With a recount, we have more time. So we have 13 days to count the ballots. You're also just counting the ballots. You're double checking all the paper artifacts of the elections. You're not actually helping voters that come in to cast their ballot on election day. So we certainly need many fewer people for canvassing, for recounts. But I think most of our counties, and it's their discretion to be able to kind of form their teams and figure out what they need in terms of resources, but they're going to be looking to their A team, right? They're going to be looking to their municipalities that have experience. They're going to be looking to their chief inspectors that have experience to bring them in to do this process, because it really is something that requires knowledge, that requires experience with elections to be able to make sure that you're analyzing everything, that you're double checking everything. So unlike election day and poll workers, where I think we have opportunities to train folks up and make sure that we've got the poll workers that we need, a recount or even the canvass process is a process that requires a little more expertise in terms of conducting that process over that 13-day window.
Thank you.
All right, next, Fox 11.
Hi guys, thank you for doing this. My question has to do with the cost of the recount as well. Because there may need a need for a bigger space to allow folks to social distance as for the staff that's actually doing the recounting, do you think that is going to, one, drive up the price? And then two, I was looking at the report myself just while I was on this call, but how much of the renting space and the fees associated with renting the space has to do with the overall, about $2 million costs of the recount last time around?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I do think that a larger space is going to be a big consideration for a lot of places. A pandemic changes a lot in terms of spacing needed. I know even when we did things like nomination paper review this year, we couldn't use our office. We were used to having people stop into our office, go sit at somebody's cube, right next to them as they did this paperwork. And I think in a lot of ways, that's how recounts had been conducted before too, is that people were able to be in these really close quarters conducting this process. And so I think for the majority of our counties, space is a major consideration and is a different consideration than 2016. I don't think that was as much of a factor. I don't think we saw a lot of places needing that additional space. And so I certainly do anticipate that will increase the costs. Plus things like, needing supplies, needing to make sure that you've got the PPE that you need, things like dividers to set up that space correctly so that people can still see the process, but still be safe. And again, those security costs for additional space as well. And so I think those are all factors that each of our counties will have to consider. Some might have adequate space and adequate security to accomplish this safely, but others may not. And I do think too, again, you're bringing back your poll workers, your chief inspectors from your jurisdictions, and you're asking them to work during this 13-day period over a holiday. And so that'll be a consideration on the cost as well.
Next is Pat from Youth Politics.
Hi, Megan. Thanks again for doing these. So I wanted to ask about some of the differences we're seeing between the unofficial results from municipalities and what we've seen so far from canvasses. I think in comparing those two, we've seen like roughly 100 odd votes be added on for Joe Biden. And when we last checked, I think around 30 for President Trump. Now, obviously, we've reached out to the municipalities and the counties on this because that's where it's done, but that's kind of slow work. So I was hoping you might be able to speak a little bit to why we're seeing some of these deviations.
Sure. And I can't speak specifically to each jurisdiction. Like you said, that's information best suited for them. But one of the things I forgot to mention earlier is also provisional ballots. So during the canvassing process is also where provisional ballots are added to the total. And there were about 366 provisional ballots that were issued in the presidential election. I think that was the final count that we received. And some of those voters will bring in their photo ID so that the ballot is able to be cast and added to the totals. So, in some cases, we would see provisional ballots being counted. Some others might be like the other example I gave of the military ballot. And so there are these small numbers of ballots that can be adjusted as those boards of canvass meet at the municipal or the county level. But they're each required to keep minutes and very detailed documentation of that canvass process. And so they would also be able to explain in detail any change, even if it was a single ballot that happened during their canvass process.
Thank you.
The other reason that some of these changes happen are just the county boards of canvasses are catching math errors. And I think that may explain a lot, but Megan's right, you need to contact them to find out. Next is Rebecca Klopf.
That's actually my question. In speaking with some of the county clerks in the state, it seems like a majority of the mistakes are simple human error, putting in a number wrong, transposing numbers as they're entered in, maybe even adding wrong before they submit the number, or hand adding wrong. Is this common? Is this something that we usually see in elections, that there are just minor human errors on some level?
Yes, there are always certainly minor errors, but I think, anything that was just described again is very minor. It's not going to change the outcome of any given election. A lot of our jurisdictions, it only amounts to 5% of the actual ballots that are cast, but it's a large percentage of our municipalities are small enough where they're hand count jurisdictions. They actually don't use tabulation equipment at their polling places in some of our small towns. And so, you can also see human errors in that as well. And so, yeah, I think we're certainly not seeing anything unusual. And I would also point out that this is what Canvas is for. This is why we canvass. This is why we triple check the numbers, is to make sure we get every last one right. And so that's what Canvas is for. That's when you want to find these errors so that you can correct them before the results are certified.
All right, next is Rachel Hopmeyer.
Hi, thanks guys for doing this. I know we all collectively owe you a ton of coffee through this. Back onto that canvassing note, how does the progress we have today, 55 of 72 counties, compared to the timeline we saw in 2016? Do we have more or less done by now? Is this impacted by the voter turnout we're seeing? Just kind of a refresher of where we're at and how normal we feel about this, even though we say it's quote unquote good progress.
Yeah, so I don't have an exact comparison of 2016 and this point in the timeline, how many canvases we had in. But in my experience of running, elections or being involved in the canvass process for a long time, this is pretty usual, and I've been impressed with their ability to adjust to the volume of absentees and some of the new procedures involved in not only election day, but in the canvassing process. And so again, I don't think it's an accident. I think our local election officials, they prepared for this. They looked ahead to say, what am I going to need during the canvass process? What do I need to adjust to having this new volume of absentees? And they've been able to bring in those resources. So I think we're moving along at a pace that we would typically see in almost any election, not just a presidential one, in terms of their ability to accomplish their canvass during the usual timeline.
Awesome, thank you.
Next is Helderman.
Hey, yeah, it's Rosalind Helderman with the Washington Post. Thank you so much for all of this really helpful information. I had wanted to ask a little bit more about the timeline. Should there be a recount for state certification following the completion of the recount? Can the results be certified immediately at the end of the 13 days? Is there a need to wait for a window? for possible litigation? And if so, how does that figure into the December 8th and December 14th elector deadlines?
Yeah, so there certainly are some potential windows where if there were legal challenges that it would stall any ability to be able to certify the results. No, I do think that the commission would be able to certify the results right away if there weren't any challenges to the process or pending court decisions. But there are also a couple different steps in the process. There is actually certifying the winners of a contest, and then they're sending the presidential electors. And both of those operate under different timelines and have different sort of challenge windows as well. And so I think the commission would be looking to certify those results as soon as they're able. There are also checks that we have to do before when we canvass and certify results at the state level as well. And so we, of course, would need time to be able to do that no matter what, but we would be able to operate quite quickly on that and would try to convene the commission as soon as possible, pending any sort of challenge.
All right, next is Joseph States. Go ahead, Joseph. We're not hearing you, Joseph. Joseph, I'm going to mute you and go on, since we can't hear you, to Shaquille from NBC. Shaquille, you got to unmute yourself.
There. All right. Sorry about that. My computer froze right as I was doing that. A question in terms of ballots received after that 8 p.m. Election night deadline. Is there any idea that you have this early of how many ballots were received and rejected for arriving late? Those mail-in ballots specifically?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we do not know yet. So state law allows our local election officials 45 days to record voter registration, voter participation into the statewide system. So really, right now they're certifying the election as it is on paper, and they have 45 days then to take that and put it in to the electronic records. And so once they're finished with that, then they turn their attention to the other items of recording the election that aren't required by statute. And recording ballots that came in after 8 p.m. on election day is one of those items. So it's certainly something they have to maintain as part of the records retention deadlines of 22 months for any election related materials, but they do have a longer period of time to enter those in. So we don't have that data yet, and I expect that once our clerks are through their canvass, their certification, and then doing all the data entry from the election itself, that they'll then turn their attention to that. And I'm sure, as we always do, we'll write a memo or a report about analyzing that data once it's available.
Just quickly following up, based on your conversations in the different meetings that you've been having with the different counties, do you have any sense of that, of how high that number is or how low that number is? Are people surprised by, there not being that many? Do you have any kind of general sense?
So the counties don't have this information. It's all with the municipalities. So all 1,850 municipalities are the ones that are custodians of this information. But I haven't heard from any that they're reporting a surprising number of undeliverables. So that hasn't been something that's come to our attention. But again, that's just sort of, the absence of information rather than actual information, which we will have after that time period has passed. I should also note that we're required to file federal reports that report all of the data of the election. All states do. And that's also one of the items as part of that report is any late returned ballots, any rejected ballots. And so, we'll all have to be patient as we've had to be in every step of this election, but we will have that data once everything has been closed out and reconciled.
Thank you.
All right, we're running short on time, so let's. Next is Jason Calvi.
Yeah, just a quick question here. What happens if the commission is deadlocked on certification? 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. What happens if they're deadlocked?
Yeah, so I should have clarified a little bit on that as well. So certification of the election is actually by statute a power of the chair of the commission. So the chair of the commission or their designee is who certifies the elections. It doesn't require a full vote of the commission. But we do want to make sure that we're meeting with the commission on the 19th when that happens, so that the election can be certified, but also in the event that there is, recount, we've got some questions that we also need to make sure that procedurally we're on the same page before a process like that would start.
All right, next is Jonathan Sadowski.
Hi, Megan, thanks for having this again. There's been a lot of talk about, a lack of any sort of evidence of significant fraud or significant irregularities. Are you even aware of any isolated, credible reports of fraud or any irregularity whatsoever in the state?
So I'm not personally, but we encourage, of course, our local election officials as they're canvassing, as they're doing their data entry, they're also double checking all their records. And if there was any indication of somebody voting twice or any other type of misconduct of the election, that local election official reports that straight to their district attorney. And so it actually doesn't come through our office. It goes from the municipal clerk right to the respective district attorney to prosecute. And so they do let us know that information. We're required to report out that information to the public and to the legislature after each of our general elections, which we will do. But I'm personally not aware of any, but that doesn't mean that there haven't been municipal clerks that have found some type of irregularity or some type of isolated voter fraud that have potentially referred that to their district attorneys.
Great, thank you. And then just to follow up real quick, was there any in 2016 any isolated cases like that?
So yes, after each election, we put out a report on any sort of voter fraud. And that's a requirement that we submit that to the legislature and that we post it publicly. So if you go to elections.wi.gov, you'll actually see the reports from each of our elections, where not only we audit the records to go through and take a macro look at the states and make sure that make sure nobody voted in multiple jurisdictions. And our local election officials do the same and also make those referrals. And we even have a process to do that across the country using the ERIC data. And members of ERIC actually compare our voter participation records and make referrals for prosecution based on any cross-state results. And so certainly over the years, there are people that commit this type of crime, and those people are referred to district attorneys for prosecution. And you can see all of those records and referrals that have been made over the years available on our website.
And if you're looking for that on the website, look on under the resources menu for publications, and then from there go to reports, and then you'll see there are annual reports, I believe, going back to 2016. Next is Sean Johnson.
Hi, Megan. I just wanted to circle back to a real basic question. For a member of the public who maybe has never followed a canvass before, but is following this one this year, how confident should they be in those numbers that are being reported by counties right now? And knowing about, of the likelihood of a recount, what extra steps are taken in that recount that are designed to give the public more confidence?
Yeah, so the election process in itself is designed to be transparent. It's designed for people to ask questions and to raise concerns at every step of the way. And so that's certainly not something that's reserved for canvass or for recount. If you're observing things like in-person absentee voting, if you're observing election day, you have opportunities to challenge voters in real time if you don't think somebody's a qualified elector. And so I think everything from the issuance of absentee ballot to voter registration records, those are all publicly observable, available to public scrutiny. So, every day of the year, people can engage to make sure that the lists are current and only eligible voters are available to get ballots. And then you look at election day, where you can come and watch election day as it unfolds. You can come watch central count and the absentees being counted. You can watch even after the polls close as they're finishing those end of night procedures. And then the canvas, I mean, really that's 3 more checks on the process where you can actually also watch. So you can go to your municipality and watch as they double check their results. You can see the inspector statements and see anything that came up throughout the day. You can make sure that all those numbers match. Same thing happens at the county where you can watch that again. And then we do those checks again at the state level. And so I think there's just every step of elections is transparent. There's nothing that happens that is not transparent, that's not public data that you can't have access to. And so I think voters really should have a great deal of confidence in the process. And if they have more questions, they can also engage with their local election official as well. And so in terms of a recount, you know, it's really many of the same procedures you're going to see at the canvass process. So it's another opportunity to go back through all of those records and make sure that everything lines up. One of the things I'll say about recounts that's a little different than, say, a canvass is during the canvass, you have to keep all the ballot bags and things actually sealed. So the bags that have the actual ballots in them, those remain sealed. During a recount, of course, you're opening those to double check everything to make sure that not only do you have enough signatures as ballots issued and registrations, but you're also retallying all of those ballots. And so that's probably the big difference between a canvass and a recount is the actual retallying of all of those ballots.
All right, next is Scott Bauer.
Hey, thanks. Kind of piggybacking on that, Megan, what do you say to people who are utterly convinced that this was an illegitimate election? Nothing you say will convince them otherwise. They don't believe anything about the security of the ballots that were cast. What do you say to those people who have no faith in this election?
You know, I wake up every morning and I ask myself that question too, because I really feel like it's my responsibility to tell people about how elections work. And if there's people that don't understand or don't feel like they have the information they need to feel confident, that we haven't fully done our job, that there's more we could do to help people understand or to get that information out there. And so I think, you know, we continue to do that, right? We all continue to engage with that process and make sure that we've got information out there. And so I think being even more transparent, putting even more information out there is one of the things. And, you know, asking people to look at that, asking them, you know, if they see something that raises their concerns, if they see something that they find to be concerning, to check in with the source of election information and facts, which is your local election official and your state election official, to go watch, to observe the process. You know, elections happen in your local community. So on election day, each neighborhood, each community has a polling place where you can go and actually watch the process unfold. You can go watch them double check during canvass. And so, you know, I really would encourage people that are feeling skeptical about the process. I know how important this is. I mean, this is of the utmost importance. And so I would encourage people to get involved, to seek out more information from sources like your local election official or your state election official, and to get involved in the process, to observe the canvass. If there's a recount, to observe the recount, and to learn about how elections work. And if you see issues with the process, if you see things that you don't like about the process, to ask, why is that process there? And usually the answer is, that's what the law says. You know, my job as an election administrator is just to implement the law. I don't have opinions about laws. I don't have laws I like or don't like. I just am handed laws, and we're asked as election administrators to implement those. And so if some of the procedures are things that perhaps you don't like or think could be improved, you know, those are certainly great questions for your lawmakers as well.
Next is Meagan Silver. Meagan, are you there?
Sorry.
Hi,
Can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes, great. Sorry about that. So I'm just piggybacking on what Rosalind Helderman asked about the electors. I was just wondering, what would happen if there is a recount and there's still some controversy about the election results past December 8th? Can you just kind of like explore what would happen there if there's like a safe harbor date and then there's still things pending? What could we possibly be looking at?
Yeah, I certainly don't want to speculate about that. And I also don't want to pretend that I'm an expert in that, in terms of how that process works, because that's sort of beyond our role as a commission. But certainly, if we find ourselves in those situations, if we find ourselves in litigation, we'll make sure to be transparent about any dates or deadlines that come up that we may be approaching. But I think at this point, our energy and our effort is focused on preparing for an event, a possible recount, finishing the canvas, and if we find ourselves facing other challenges in terms of legal challenges, then we'll have to analyze those deadlines and any potential conflicts that might arise.
Thanks.
And then Adam.
Hi,
Adam
Meagan.
Brewster.
Hi, Meagan. Thanks for doing this. Just quick, is December 1st, I just got confused by something you said. Is December 1st the date that the results would be certified if there were not a recount, or is that just the deadline? Could they be certified on the 19th if there's no recount by this WEC?
Yes, right. So the results under circumstances where there isn't a recount have to be certified by December 1st, but the commission could certainly certify them sooner, before December 1st. There's a few other things that still have to happen. So again, right now we're focusing on if there is a recount. There's also things like our post-election voting equipment audit, which is on hold right now because, again, they can't open those ballot bags because there's the possibility of a recount. And so they can't conduct those voting equipment audits until after the deadline for a recount has passed if there is a contest within the margin. And so there's still some work that would have to be done even if there isn't a recount. But yes, the commission could certify before December 1st. They would just have to certify by December 1st.
Got it. How would that be announced? Would it be just the commission's going to meet tomorrow to certify the results if it were to happen before December 1st?
Yeah, definitely. So we send out, we have to post our public notices, our public meeting notices, which we would do like we do for any meeting. And then we send out the announcements as well. So, like you got the announcement for today, we would send out an announcement for there being a commission meeting to certify the results.
Thank you.
All right, and just circling back for anybody who had other questions. Roz, did you have one more? Apparently not. How about Matt Smith? Do you have one?
Yeah, Meagan, I just wanted you to expand just on that certification one more time, just so I understand. What you said is, so in theory, only Anne has to certify those results when the election commission, this doesn't require a vote.
Yes, that's correct. Yes,
okay.
The chair of the commission certifies the election or their designee.
Great. But the commission will still meet when that happens to explain or whatever, what's happening?
Right. So the certification of an election, any election, so be it the one that we just had in August, is always certified as part of a public meeting. And it's really watching someone sign a piece of paper, me explaining the things that we did to double check the results and making sure that everything's in order. But it really is just a matter of the chair signing the piece of paper certifying the election. The meeting would be to discuss, other things in terms of what are the next steps. A lot of times commission meetings are about telling the public what's happening, telling the public what is the procedure, what's happening here, and having that conversation in public as well. So the signing, the certifying of the election is done by the chair. It's always done as part of a public meeting, but for a presidential election, it's been the tradition to pair that with a regular meeting as well to make sure that we're addressing any questions or concerns that might come up from the public or from commissioners.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Cheyenne Hazlett, did you have another question?
Yeah, I just want to double check. So the December 1 deadline is moot in the event of a recount, right? Like that deadline you don't have to adhere to if a recount is going on during that time.
That's right, because then you can't certify an election until the recount is complete. So once the 13 days has been, the recount has been completed and 13 days has passed, then the certification would happen. So certification under recount circumstances is dependent on when the recount finishes and when we get those recount results back from the counties.
Okay, thank you so much.
Another question from Pat from WisPolitics.
Hi, Megan. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. Do you think it's a conflict of interest that a member of the commission is also one of the people put forward by Republicans as an elector for Wisconsin?
Yeah, we've certainly asked that question, and nobody's aware of that being a conflict. I mean, they really are two completely separate procedures. We don't run the presidential elector process. That is something that's done by the parties. And so, that question has certainly been asked, and there hasn't been any conflict brought to our attention about that.
Thank you.
Riley Vetterkind.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So this is probably getting a bit ahead of ourselves too, and I don't know if you'd be able to answer this, but if it does come down to the chairperson of the commission to certify the election, I'm just imagining a scenario, maybe in this election, maybe in a future election, where because of political interests, the person decides not to certify. Is there any fallback? Is there any, would we just not have a certified election? I'm just wondering if there's anything in the law that would kick in if we just don't have a certification.
I think that's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer immediately before me. We could certainly look into that a little bit more. A presidential election, I will say, is a little bit different, right? Because there's the certification of the election, and then there's kind of the naming on a state level, who the winner of a federal or a statewide contest is. And then there's the presidential elector process. And so, I don't know right now what exactly the answer is to that question, but it's certainly something that we could look into.
All right. I think that's it for today. Anything else you want to add, Megan, to wrap up?
No, but just thank you as always. Appreciate you all being here. And thanks for helping us to get information out there to folks to make sure that, we're getting information, mechanical facts out there about things that concern voters. So I really do appreciate your role in that. So thank you.
And this is Reed again shortly. As soon as Zoom renders the video, I will send out a link to it along with the Wisconsin Eye version of the video as well. Thanks for all for coming, and let me know if you need anything. Bye.